The day the SWAT team kicked down our front door, they didn't find a meth lab, a weapons cache, or a hostage situation in the traditional sense. They found two 19-year-old ghosts living in a basement that smelled of bleach and decaying drywall. I remember shielding my eyes, screaming as the tactical lights hit my face, burning retinas that hadn't seen direct light in over a decade. As the paramedics loaded my sister and me onto gurneys, our skin translucent, our bones visible through rags that used to be t-shirts, I saw my father being dragged out in cuffs. He wasn't fighting for his freedom. He was screaming at the officers to put their masks on. He yelled that by exposing us to the open air, they were committing murder, that we were biological weapons, and that the contamination had finally begun. That was the moment the neighborhood learned that the quiet family at the end of the cul-de-sac had been running a private concentration camp for 12 years. But to understand how a suburban split level becomes a tomb, you have to understand the lie that started it all. It began when I was 7 years old, the day my brother Julian was born. Before Julian, my sister Clara and I were normal children. We played tag in the backyard. We went to public school. We scraped our knees. But when Julian arrived, something in my father's brain snapped and rewired itself into a terrifying new configuration. He came home from the hospital, not with a baby, but with a decree. He gathered us in the living room, holding Julian like he was made of spun glass, and told us that our brother was pure. He said that the world outside the air, the soil, and especially other people, was filled with a corruption that would destroy Julian's immune system and cognitive development. And the most dangerous carriers of this corruption, he explained calmly, were Clara and me. The restrictions started slowly, which is how they get you to comply. First, it was just no playing outside so we wouldn't track pollen into the house. Then, school was canceled because the other children were vectors of disease. My mother, a woman who had slowly shrunk under my father's dominance long before this, nodded along, terrified to disagree. Within 6 months, my father was nailing thick, black rubber mats over every window in the house. He claimed that even the sight of the outside world carried a photonic frequency that could damage Julian's developing brain. I was 7. I believed him. I thought I was protecting my baby brother. By the time I was 10, the upstairs was designated as a clean zone where only father and Julian were allowed to live freely. Clara and I, along with our mother, were relegated to the basement. My father installed a heavy steel door at the top of the stairs with a deadbolt only he could operate. He called the landing, the airlock, if we needed food, or if mother needed to come up to cook and clean for them. We had to undergo a 45-minute decontamination process involving harsh chemical scrubs that left our skin raw and peeling. The basement wasn't furnished for living. It was a storage space. Concrete floors, exposed insulation, and a single utility sink. That was our world. My father provided us with buckets for biological waste, which he would only allow us to empty once a week, wearing a hazmat suit he'd purchased online. He stopped calling us by our names. I became Vector 1, and Clara was Vector 2. He told us that we were teeming with pathogens, that our very breath was poison to Julian. I am keeping you alive out of mercy, he would say through the intercom system he installed. But if you ever try to breach the airlock, I will have to neutralize the threat. Do you understand? We understood. As the years blurred together, the isolation began to rot us from the inside out. Without sunlight, our bodies stopped producing vitamin D. My hair, once thick and brown, began to fall out in clumps. Clara, who was 2 years younger, fared worse. Her legs began to bow from rickets, the bones softening until walking became agony. We spent our days in a twilight stupor, reading the same damp encyclopedias from the 1990s, huddled together for warmth. But the cruelest part wasn't the father who locked us away. It was the brother we were protecting. Julian grew up believing the mythology my father spun. He was the golden child, the pure one, and we were the monsters in the cellar. By the time Julian was 10, he realized the power he held. He would stand at the top of the stairs behind the safety of the steel door and mock us through the ventilation grate. I went to the park today. He would whisper, his voice echoing in the dark. The sun was so warm. I had ice cream. Chocolate. Dad says you eat rat pellets because that's what vermin deserve. He would drop things through the grate, sometimes leftovers from dinner that we would scramble for like starving animals, but usually trash. Dirty tissues, bugs he'd caught, cups of water just to watch us get wet and shiver on the concrete. One day, he dropped a single dandelion. Clara crawled over to it, weeping, cradling the crushed yellow flower like it was a diamond. She hadn't seen a color that bright in 6 years. Does it smell like the sun? She asked me, her voice raspy. I don't remember what the sun smells like, I admitted. My mother was a ghost in her own house. She spent her days in the basement with us, terrified of the husband upstairs, but she was also our jailer. She cooked the meager rice and beans we survived on. She applied the carmine lotion to our chemical burns. But whenever I begged her to unlock the door, to fight him, she would shut down. He's doing this for Julian, she would recite, her eyes empty. We have to sacrifice. If we leave, Julian dies. The turning point came on my 19th birthday, though I only knew the date because I made tick marks on the drywall behind the furnace. Clara had collapsed 2 days prior. She was shaking violently, seizing on the cold floor. Her teeth were loose and her gums scurvy, I later learned. I pounded on the steel door. Father! Clara is dying. She needs a doctor. The intercom crackled to life. It wasn't my father. It was Julian, now 12 years old. Dad says nature is taking its course. Julian said, his voice void of empathy. He says the corruption is finally consuming Vector too. He's going to seal the ventilation grate tonight. We can't risk the spores escaping when she expires. The line clicked dead. I froze. They weren't going to help her. They were going to seal the room. They were going to let us suffocate in the dark with my sister's corpse. The realization hit me not with panic, but with a cold, sharp clarity. The protection narrative was over. This was an extermination. I looked at my mother. She was rocking in the corner, mumbling prayers. Mom, I said, my voice steady for the first time in years. He's going to kill us tonight. No, no, she whimpered. He's being cautious. He is sealing the vents, I said, grabbing her thin shoulders. Think about it. When Clara dies, what happens to the body? You think he's going to carry it upstairs? No, he's going to pour concrete down here. He's going to bury us alive, Mom. All of us. You included. Her eyes widened. The fear of her husband was strong, but the fear of being buried alive was primal. He wouldn't bury me. I'm his wife. You're a Vector. I spat the word at her. To him, you're just as dirty as we are. You haven't been outside in 12 years either. Do you think he's ever going to let you back in the clean zone? Look at yourself. I dragged her to the polished metal reflection of the utility sink. She looked at the skeletal, gray-skinned creature staring back. For the first time, she didn't see a martyr. She saw a victim. "What do we do?" she whispered. "The airlock," I said. "When he opens it to seal the grate, he has to unlock the main bolt. That's our only chance." We waited for hours in the dark. I sharpened the handle of a plastic toilet brush against the concrete until it was a jagged shiv. It wasn't much, but it was the only weapon I had. Around 2 o'clock a.m., the heavy clink of the deadbolt echoed. My father wasn't alone. I could hear Julian giggling. They were treating this like a late-night project. The door creaked open a few inches. My father was wearing his full hazmat suit, holding a caulking gun and a sheet of metal. "Stand back, Vectors!" he barked, his voice muffled by the respirator. "Face the wall!" I nudged my mother. This was the moment. She hesitated, trembling. I pinched her arm hard. She let out a sob and collapsed onto the floor, faking a seizure just like Clara's. "Help!" I screamed, pitching my voice to sound pathetic and weak. "She's dead! She's dead!" My father paused. He was a narcissist, but he was also practical. A dead body right at the threshold was a logistical problem he hadn't planned for. He pushed the door open wider to see. "Don't touch her," he yelled at Julian, who was trying to peek around his legs. As he stepped onto the landing, distracted by my mother's body, I didn't attack him. I was 80 pounds of skin and bone. I couldn't overpower a grown man. Instead, I scrambled up the stairs on all fours, slipping past his legs like a rat. "Hey!" Julian shouted. My target wasn't escape not yet. It was the lever on the wall, the master breaker for the house. I slammed my hand against it, plunging the entire house into pitch blackness. My father's night vision was ruined by the sudden shift. He stumbled in the clumsy hazmat suit. "Julian, get the flashlight!" But in the dark, I knew exactly where I was. I had memorized every inch of that staircase by touch for a decade. I grabbed Julian's ankle and pulled. He went down screaming, tumbling into my father. They collapsed in a heap of rubber and confusion. "Run, Mom!" I shrieked. My mother, driven by pure adrenaline, scrambled up the stairs, stepping over her husband and son. We burst into the hallway. The light coming from the street lamps outside blinded me instantly. It felt like needles in my eyes. I fell disoriented. My father was roaring from the basement stairs, scrambling to get up. "The car keys!" I yelled, blindly grasping at the wall where the key hook used to be 12 years ago. Miraculously, his habits hadn't changed. My fingers curled around the fob. We didn't make it to the car. We didn't have to. I triggered the panic alarm on the fob. Honk! 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 The sound was deafening in the quiet night. Lights flicked on in the neighbors' houses. My father burst out the front door, ripping off his mask, his face purple with rage. He had a crowbar in his hand. "Get back inside!" he screamed. "You're killing us all!" But then he stopped. He saw Mrs. Gable from next door standing on her porch with her phone. He saw the headlights of a car turning onto the street. He looked at me cowering on the lawn, shielding my eyes, looking like a skeleton wrapped in rags, and he realized the one thing he could control: the narrative. He dropped the crowbar. He didn't try to run. He just stood there and wept. Not for us, but because his pure world had been breached. The police arrived 4 minutes later. The recovery was brutal. Clara spent 3 months in the ICU. Her bones were so brittle, they had to be reinforced surgically. I lost most of my teeth and require weekly dialysis because my kidneys were shutting down from dehydration and malnutrition. My father, Robert Vance, was sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms. During the trial, he represented himself wearing a surgical mask the entire time, refusing to speak to the judge because she was unclean. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. My mother was charged with child endangerment and aiding and abetting. She served 2 years, but the guilt is a life sentence she's still serving. We don't speak. I can't look at her without seeing the woman who held the key for 12 years and never used it. And Julian? He was placed in foster care. The last I heard, he was in a juvenile detention center for setting a cat on fire. He couldn't adjust to a world where he wasn't the god of his own universe. I live in a small apartment now with Clara. We have big windows. We leave the curtains open 24 hours a day. Sometimes when the sun is at its peak, it burns my skin, and the brightness gives me a migraine. But I sit there and I take it. I let it burn, because the pain reminds me that I'm not in the basement anymore, and no one is ever going to close a door on me again.